Good evening and welcome. Before we begin, I acknowledge that we are here meeting tonight on the Camaragal land and acknowledge the traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people joining us here tonight. My name is Zoe Baker and I'm the Mayor of North Sydney, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this online open space and recreation discussion panel. If you want to increase the quality of your visuals, remember that there is a toggle on the right-hand side of the YouTube screen and you are able to change it if you wish to do so. Before we begin, I'd also like to thank and acknowledge the panel members who will be here tonight. Shortly, you will be joined by April McCabe of the Planning Studio, who will facilitate the discussion this evening and introduce you to the panellists. Part of what makes North Sydney such a special place is the long-term commitment to public participation in decision-making. And this tonight is part of that long tradition. Tonight, you are part of public participation in the planning for the next 10 years of North Sydney. Active public participation plays a vital role in fostering vibrant, inclusive and sustainable communities. And it is pivotal in empowering communities to meaningfully address local issues and to drive positive change. And that is why tonight's discussion panel is designed to provoke thoughts and questions on the challenges and opportunities of the next 10 years to inform your feedback. It is part of Council's next 10 years engagement, and we're inviting you to have your say on the needs, the wants, the aspirations, the challenges and the opportunities for North Sydney over the coming years. It is a true partnership between Council and our community where no decisions have been made yet. That's the purpose of this consultation. Community feedback will guide future plans and decision making. So as you all know, the residential population of North Sydney is planned to increase by almost 27% by 2036 to 2040. That's another 19,500 people to come and live here in North Sydney. We are a local government area of only 10.9 square kilometres, and yet we are one of the three most dense local government areas in the state. Only the Waverley and the City of Sydney are more dense. And yet 89% of our community live in medium and high density housing. Simultaneously, we have the lowest levels of open space and recreational facilities in the whole of northern Sydney, and we have even lower rates than those of the City of Sydney. Over the last 18 months, we have lost 3,000 trees from our local government area to major road projects, and that is part of an ongoing decline in tree canopy. Our population is increasing, open space is being lost, and at the same time, demand for active recreation, organised sports, is increasing. We know that the cost of new open space is prohibitive due to the cost of land. So as the discussion paper encourages you, let's consider how we can think outside of the box. Are there alternatives available? Can North Sydney's traditional grey spaces be reimagined to lend themselves to open space and recreation opportunities? And if we can't expand existing sporting facilities, how can we use them more effectively and efficiently? We also must recognise the diverse needs of our community when it comes to open space and recreation. So whether it's active pursuits like sports and fitness activities to passive enjoyment of open space, there is significant and often competing demand for both our spaces and the opportunities within them. Whatever the future of open space looks like, we must adopt an equitable and balanced approach to its management and use. This entails not only preserving and maintaining these precious resources, but also ensuring that they are accessible to everyone within the community, whatever their ability, their gender, age, need, preference or motivation for enjoying the outdoors. The benefits of access to open space and recreational opportunities are very well documented. We know that it improves well-being, it builds community connections, and it provides environmental benefits and even economic uplift. Access to open space and recreation benefits everyone. So as part of this discussion, we must consider how we can remove the barriers that impede access to open space and participation in recreation. Whether these barriers stem from accessibility, affordability, or inclusivity. We can only properly address this issue if we are genuinely committing to removing these barriers and fostering participation from as many members of our community as possible. The challenges we face in relation to open space and recreation in North Sydney are really significant, but they are not insurmountable. They also present much opportunity. Tonight, our panel of experts will provide evidence-based insights and diverse perspectives to help us consider what the solutions might be and discuss how we can work together to deliver the outcomes. So finally, my message to you is be ambitious and aspirational in your thinking and in your feedback, and also to be ambassadors to your friends, families, neighbours and colleagues. Encourage at least 3 people you know to participate in the online surveys, the pop-ups, the events. The more and more diverse views that inform this public and community engagement, the better. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what I think will be a fantastic discussion tonight about open space and recreation. My name is April McCabe. I'm the director of the Planning Studio, and I've got the fantastic task tonight of guiding our panel of experts, both from afar and local, to have a discussion about the challenges and the opportunities facing us over the next 10 years here in North Sydney to deliver that all those open space and recreation opportunities that the Mayor just spoke about. I'd just like to acknowledge we are coming to you from Camaragal land, but I also acknowledge that everyone on the stream tonight is coming from different places, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders past and present of all the lands that you're coming from tonight. I always like to sort of think about that connection to country and how important I think open space, recreation, parks, our bushlands give us this amazing opportunity for all of us to really connect with country, and how we do that and how we integrate some of those practices of our First Nation peoples in how we manage our open spaces and parks, and how we use them for that sort of multifaceted as places of cultural significance and learning as well. As the Mayor said, we're really using this opportunity for this panel to kick off a broader engagement program. So certainly this is not your only opportunity to participate. There are multiple opportunities, and to find out more about how you can get involved in the conversation about open space and recreation and the other strategies that North Sydney Council are currently working on and engaging the community on. You just need to go to North Sydney Council's website to be able to find out how you can get involved. But for tonight, we do have an opportunity. So in the bottom corner of your screen, you will see a QR code. That QR code will lead you to Slido, and that is your opportunity to ask questions. We'll have the panellists and have a bit of a discussion, but what we'll do is towards the end of tonight, we'll throw over to your questions as well and to answer some of your questions. I really want to reiterate to people through this engagement process, and certainly these panel of people are here to challenge, to think about open space differently, but also to bring their own lived experience about how they access, use and experience open space as well. So I'm going to throw that challenge to all of you watching as well, to think differently. As the Mayor pointed out, there is some huge amounts of challenges in terms of the highly urbanised area that is North Sydney, but they're not insurmountable. It just requires us to think a bit differently, and I think that to really understand what values those open space and recreation facilities and spaces provide our community beyond the health and wellbeing that they provide. Before I get the panellists to introduce themselves, because I'm not going to do that, it's very awkward to kind of do that, but I want all of you thinking on the stream, what is your favourite open space? What is your favourite park? Where is that place you go to connect with nature, to get out of the rat race, to breathe and to really calm? And I think once you start to think into that space, you'll realise that there is an intrinsic value that we can't necessarily put a word or a label on, but it's a feeling. And that's the kind of thing that open space benefits all of us. I wanted to clarify before we start as well that when we talk about open space, we are talking about quite a spectrum of open spaces. And that can be anything from our civic spaces, our public parks, our natural bushland, but also too, it can be places, and we see across, and I've noticed some questions already about how we better use our streets. How do we use those spaces that aren't necessarily green, but they would fall into the realm of what we would call public spaces. And I think understanding that. It's also our formal sporting and recreation spaces as well. So we're going to have a really, I hope, broad and expansive conversation. So I'm going to hand over to our panellists. As I said, they're going to introduce themselves. And I've posed the question to them as, what is your favourite park or open space that you like to do, and what do you do in it? So I'm going to start at the end there with Naomi. So just to introduce yourself, where you're from, and your favourite park.
Thanks, April. My name's Naomi Deck, and I've been living in the area for about 10 years. I guess the best way to sum me up is I'm a people person, and so if you think of the word extrovert, all of those letters are in capitals for me. So that means I love catching up with people, and that means I love going to spaces where I can do that. I think one of my favourite public spaces is actually half shared with us and City of Sydney, in that I love the Harbour Bridge. I love walking across the Harbour Bridge. I feel like it's a beautiful way to connect with the urban environment, but also with nature, and I really love that. And as you might be able to see on my leg, you might not be able to see it right now, but this is not a police tracking device. This is a nerve brace, which means that I can walk without tripping over my own foot. And so when I'm thinking about public spaces that I want to go to, I'm thinking about ones that are accessible for me, where I'm not going to trip over, right? So I want it to be flat-ish. I want there not to be trip risks like raised footpaths and that kind of thing. And also, what I love about the bridge is I can decide to walk up the steps if I've got the energy, or I can take the lift up, right? And so there's options for me that I don't have to go out of my way to get a special key for, or email you before going to make sure that I can access the bridge. So that's what I love. So thanks.
Excellent, thank you. And welcome, Kate. I'll get you to introduce yourself, and what's your favourite park?
Thank you. My name's Kate Sharma. I've lived in North Sydney most of my life, and I have 2 teenagers, so they use the parks quite a bit, and my eldest goes to Planet X quite a bit. I do like St Leonard's Park because it has a lot of things to offer, but I was thinking I prefer Berry Island because you have a beautiful view of the harbour, so it's just a nice tranquil place to be. So
yeah,
that was
fantastic. Welcome. We're grateful that you're on the panel with us, so thank you. John, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. I live in Wollstonecraft, and I've lived here for 30 years. I'm retired from a pretty large job where I manufactured locomotives and rolling stock, and did a lot of project management. And so I've taken an interest in the precinct at Wollstonecraft and done a lot of work in trying to advocate for additional open space. As far as a favourite place for me, because Wollstonecraft has no shops, it necessitates that we do a lot of walking. And where I live, I can walk down to Berry Island, up to Crow's Nest, and I can do about an hour's walk and get about 5 kilometres in each day. Now that satisfies my need for open space, and when I'm at Crow's Nest, I can enjoy the park there at Ernest Place, and when I'm at home, I can walk down to Brennan Park, or I can walk to Berry Island, and I can walk around Berry Island. So the options are good, but of course the need is for more open space, the more people we get.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. And Martin, you've come from quite a far afield to join us tonight, which we're very grateful. So if you can introduce yourself, and what's your favourite open space or park?
Yeah, thanks very much. Martin Sheppard, I'm the Managing Director of Smart Connection Consultancy. We work with lots of governments on developing and planning for active spaces within their municipalities. My favourite open spaces is where I can recharge my body and my mind. So when I'm recharging my body, I love to go for a walk or a jog or play sport. If I'm recharging my mind, I like to go somewhere peaceful where there's lots of trees. And since I was 40 years old, which is a while ago now, I used to love going into cemeteries because they're very quiet, they're very underused, and if you get a nice cemetery where it's got lots of trees, you can recharge and just sit and let the time go by. And every week we lost our son about 10, 15 years ago, and he's buried in a native cemetery. So there's lots of trees, pathways and everything else. And myself and my wife go out there, we read him a story, we recharge every week, and we come back and then face the realities.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And finally, Dimitri, welcome. It's okay, you just have to talk.
Thank you for that. I'm over here to represent a brand new sport called pickleball, and if you ask me about which park would I would like any park that has a small flat area with a pickleball court on it and some greenery around, where I can do exactly what this gentleman has just suggested, both relax while I'm not playing and do something for my body. This is a new growing sport, but for the North Sydney area, it is a fantastic fit because it can be used on existing hard surfaces, it can share facilities with other sports, and it ensures that these facilities get used for more hours. And it is the most inclusive sport there is. It's played from 8 to 80.
Yeah, great. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those ways we can look at our sporting facilities a little bit differently. And as you can see, what I think is great with this panel is there's a diversity of views, but I think what's consistent is we're using open spaces for both those passive and those active opportunities and activities. And I think one of the things we want to talk a little bit about tonight as well is thinking about those spaces that we might not necessarily have thought about, like cemeteries, but also to some other different types of spaces of how we can, I suppose, make them work a little harder for what we need to ensure that our growing population, their needs and their health and well-being, and that connection need as well is really important. One of the things we talk a lot about when we talk about open space in particular is those health and wellbeing benefits. And I think, Naomi, you talked about someone living with disability and that important for that accessibility. You're also, I'm going to reveal, you're also in a healthcare professional as well. And so I'd really love to kick off with you about what are those really important health and wellbeing benefits beyond the physical, because I think we know about the physical. We know that walking, pre-COVID but post-COVID, is the most popular recreation activity across Australia. It's easy, it's free. But I'd love to hear from you from your healthcare background, about what are some of those broader benefits that we can get from our access to open space.
Yeah, thanks, April. As you alluded to, I think we all realised in the COVID lockdown the benefits for our mind and our bodies to have access to open space. And so there's so much evidence about how much mental stress it reduces, how it improves your heart health, your mind health, and just your ability to be able to connect with other people. And so I think we really need to be thinking, as our area becomes more urban, how are we able to increase our green space and make that more accessible for kind of multiple people. And I think as we keep talking about the cost of living, you know, there's a cost of that to our mental health budget and those kind of things. So what are some outside the box, they're not that outside the box ways to kind of approach that, right? And so I think, particularly when we're thinking of people that are living with a disability, it's all about trying to remove those barriers that are getting in the way of us being able to participate in those things. And so I think often when people think about disability access, they're thinking about the bathroom and they're thinking about the mobility parking pass. But I think we need to think a little bit deeper and practically about that. And so I've noticed in particular, you know, with disabled parking spaces, they're quite shallow. And so how are you supposed to get your wheelchair out without being taken out by a car? You know, those kind of things. And kind of are there places where you can be dropped off at a park that's accessible as well? I went to a really beautiful park a few weeks ago at Concord called Bayview. Had this really beautiful large undercover area, and there was a ramp up to the barbecue. I'd never seen that before, right? And I just loved that, because I went there with a friend who was in a wheelchair and they were just able to barbecue. Like there was normally they wouldn't be able to do that. And so that was just a real beautiful thing where we didn't have to make a big deal out of it. It could just happen kind of organically. And so I think one of the other things we need to be thinking about as well, I'm really thrilled that this is happening, but in terms of people having kind of assistance dogs, you know, we need to be thinking about spaces for them as well, where they're able to be rested in the shade, where they're able to have access to water and toileting. We kind of need to keep thinking about those things as well. Yep. And I think it would be helpful as a council to be thinking about accessibility maps, so we can kind of highlight how accessible these places are.
Yeah, really.
So that it's not this big deal of figuring out there's only this one park I can go to. I can look at the range of parks that I can go to rather than that kind of limited thing.
Yeah, great.
And then as we're thinking about kind of building spaces as well, kind of creating opportunities for connection to nature. And so, you know, are we able to include a water feature with some green space in the building? So I work at Walker Street Doctors, and as part of our design, we've got a green wall inside and there's plants in every room. You know, we're trying to find ways to continue to connect with nature.
Yep.
And so I think, that's a really lovely way to do it.
Yeah, and I think we know which biophilic design is that idea of how do we bring that feeling, that restorative feeling of nature into our urban environments. And I see it sort of infiltrating design a lot more, and a lot more conscious design happening, and I think we can certainly do more. Dimitri, you're also a healthcare professional, or have been, and I know that when we spoke, you talked about getting older people into pickleball and things, but what benefits have you seen from that more, I suppose, that social health from your involvement with pickleball that you've seen, and some of that physical health improvement that you've seen as well?
I will give you two practical examples. My sister-in-law was housebound with Parkinson's. We got her out the house and walking a little. She used to play tennis. We put her on a pickleball court and she instinctively started hitting the ball. She's now totally independent. So for people with Parkinson's, as long as it's not too severe, they can do it. I have a metal knee. I'm a retired cardiologist, but my knee is metal. I cannot play squash or tennis anymore, but I can play pickleball. During COVID, our pickleball community continued to play because we could play with 4 people. We had many old people, because you can play it up to the age of 80, who were socially isolated before they joined the pickleball group. During COVID, the rest of the group would deliver food to them, make sure they came along. If they were ill, we would go and attend to them. It's the most social game I have ever seen. Because of the range of ages, with young working people and retired people all playing it, we use the courts day and night, which is unusual. So we are able to share facilities with netballers, with basketballers, and use them when they're not using them, so we don't need to tread on other people's toes. We have a gentleman from soccer. He'll be pleased to know that we can't play pickleball on grass. We need a solid surface, and it can be played indoors as well, and indeed is now being played by Willoughby's at the Crow's Nest Basketball Centre during the day when that basketball isn't being played.
And I think you raise a really good point in terms of how do we make our assets work that little bit harder? How do we get them accessible to different opportunities? I keep hearing about pickleball, so I'm really interested. Kate, you talked about your teenage children, and I'm really interested from their experience and through you. I know sometimes open spaces and parks and things can not be the most inclusive place for young people. What has been your experience with them about, one, whether they feel welcome, and 2, the types of activities that they're able to do within open spaces, but then also yourself and how you use public spaces as well and that inclusive design?
Well, my youngest plays soccer and netball, so that's quite well catered for in North Sydney, that's for sure. And I sometimes do some yoga in the park, so it's a great place in St Leonard's Park. And of course, my teenager goes to Planet X, which is a great space for various kids of neurodiversity and kids with maybe mental health problems. So so it does cater for that. I mean, if we had more options like that would be even better. But it's doing a good job. For my kids.
Great. And John, you talked about Wollstonecraft and other areas, but what what are some of the opportunities that you see for open space, or to be more inclusive to people that you're walking with? Are there things that you would like to see in those parks that might make you stay a bit longer, or those spaces?
Yes, well, one of the ones that comes to mind is Berry Island to me, and it's a lovely open space. It has it's underutilised by a long shot. It has a lot of dogs go there, and they're able to go unleashed, which is good. So there'd be a conflict with people who take their dogs there versus the people that want to play pickleball, for example. So I can imagine a few dogs chasing pickleball. So we need to arrange those times to suit the various people that want to use them. And at Berry Island, for example, I think one of the things we need to think carefully about is a large space, which we'd like to use. We need to provide access to it because it's a very steep road.
Yeah, okay.
It's a grade of 1 in 8 of 18%, so it's a pretty hard walk at any time. But and then of course I've been on vacation with a friend of mine who's got mobility issues, and he uses a mobilised scooter to get to places where he can actually walk.
Yeah, okay.
So lots of opportunities, I think, to think outside the square. Berry Island being a very good example, a difficult one, I think, to solve, but solvable.
And I think it's really important, not only for that accessibility for people with disability, like mobility limitations, We know that North Sydney is the over 65 population is increasing in North Sydney, and so making sure that that our parks and open spaces are accessible for all people, whether you are a parent with a pram, whether you have some mobility limitations, or whether you're getting a little bit older, or just a bit of a klutz like me who's liable to trip over anything. So I think that that's a really, I think that issue and that idea of accessibility isn't just for people with disability. I think if we can design places for people with disability, we're actually benefiting a lot more people within our communities. Martin, I'm going to tap into your professional expertise here and bring this question to a more broader, I suppose, when you're advising your clients about the provision and design of open spaces, what are some of the things that you've seen that do make them more inclusive, and how I think that both Kate and John brought up those issues about those multiple users, that conflict of how we do it, because we're asking our parks and open spaces to do a lot, and sometimes we can get into that conflict. So I'd love to sort of, from your experience, how are you thinking about through the design process, and how are you thinking about that inclusive design in parks and open space?
Yeah, great question. We look at it in probably through three lenses. First of all, we look at active spaces where people can be physically active, whether that's playing sport, recreation, or wherever. We look at passive spaces where people can relax and enjoy themselves. But we look at a third, which is really the connection between spaces. So that could be walkways, roadways, cycleways, scooterways, etc., like that. So if I look at the passive side, I think we've got to make sure that there's enough passive space to do all the things we've been talking about, where you connect with community, you connect with land. There has to be lots of trees around, both for shade, but also that gives you the feeling of being grounded. And whether that be in roads, pocket parks, or larger parks, the trees and the canopy is absolutely critical for that. If we don't build enough active spaces, people will then go into the passive spaces and take over the passive spaces. So we need to sweat the assets, which is what you were saying earlier on about the active areas. Now, that could be using technology like the synthetic grass. It could be designing netball courts or tennis courts, so you could play pickleball, or you could do skating on them, or you can do five-a-side, you can do basketball, you can do 3-on-3. So I think the days of building active spaces purely for one sport, I hope, are going. And we now are really looking about using active spaces for particular cohorts. So you may turn around and say, right, we've got a space for kids' playgrounds, so let's define the age group for that kids' playground so that we're not trying to be everything to all people. But if we've got a young playground, let's put some fitness equipment around the side of it so that when the parents come and the kids are on the playground, the kids are on the playground, the parents can be active. So you're doing 2 ticks for 2 different cohorts. So we really need to think a bit differently on things like that. And then the stressing of the assets does mean that maybe we need to move away our thinking from saying club A, B, and C have that field, club D, E, and F have that field, and that's their home. Because with all due respect to sports clubs, we are very passionate and we do look after our own space. But maybe for the good of the community, we need council then to say, well, actually, we're not going to lease any of these out. We're actually going to control and manage it and sweat them a little bit more and put the technology in so that that can help. The technology might be irrigation, drainage, hybrid turf, synthetic turf, good lights, or just good maintenance of it as well. That's the starting point.
Yeah, and it takes that good governance on how you manage all of that as well, which is really important. But yes, our sporting clubs, me being one of those people involved, can get very have a strong ownership of some of our spaces as well, and in part that goes to the safety aspect. We want to make sure, like I know that there's been examples in other inner city areas in which sporting fields are used for dog off leash areas, but of course they like to dig. Dogs like to dig, and so sometimes that can create unsafe surfaces. So I think it's also too about being clear on, as you said, that difference between the passive and the active, and ensuring the safety of all people who are using it as well. And I think that's really important. I think that as the Mayor said, there are challenges in North Sydney to be able to deliver on that open space that is needed. But I'm tapping into, as a non-North Sydney local, I'm tapping into the knowledge here of our local panellists to kind of go, where do you see some opportunities, either for to use open space differently, open space that isn't necessarily green that we can think about? What are the opportunities locally that you think need to be explored through this process? Because this is the opportunity, through this study, through the strategy that will be rewritten, for North Sydney to really think about things differently. So I'm really interested locally. Let's really zoom into that local. What are the opportunities? I'm happy for a volunteer to kick off first. Oh, everyone's gone. So Dimitri, you go.
Just thinking purely from pickleball, we can play it on any surface, asphalt. We can play it on concrete, we can play it on wood. One of the opportunities would be to introduce pickleball to schools and then use the schools out of hours. My genetic heritage is from Cyprus, and they do that with all the schools because they are also short of space and the cost.
Yep.
So school space could be used. The second is there are parking lots that are only used intermittently. And you can just mark them for sports grounds, or you could put a basketball hoop up or a netball hoop without making a formal thing, and when close them off certain hours and then people can use them.
Yeah, great idea.
And then the other thing is very expensive in a place like North Sydney. You would inevitably have to consider it, and that is multi-level sporting facilities, where you have a parking lot and then you take one floor and you make it sporting facilities. That avoids destroying open space. I have to say that when we have a pickleball court surrounded by trees, we absolutely love it. It cuts the wind and gives us shade. And we just like the green feel and being in the open air. And then we had comments about disability. Pickleball is one of the few sports where 3 able-bodied people can play against a wheelchair player because they have separate rules for the wheelchair player, so they have the advantage of being able to make up for their wheelchair and their lack of mobility.
Yeah, great.
And as I said, it's a small court, so you do not have to be that physically agile.
Yep.
We have people with joint problems, and we have people with the inability to run quickly, and yet they can still be very effective pickleball players. It's kind of like table tennis on a big surface.
Yeah, great. And John, your thoughts on some, I know that you've been doing a lot of work in your local community and doing a lot of advocacy work. Where do you see the opportunities for some of that open space provision, that public space? Let's call it public space provision.
Well, I've got quite a number here if you've got enough time.
I'll let you know when we have to move on.
One thing we're progressing at the moment, or advocating right now, is the partial closure of Willoughby Road. And that's between Clark Street and Albany Street, and partial closure of Holterman Street. And that would require the rearrangement of bus routes, of course. We've studied that a little bit, and we think that's achievable from the south to north direction pretty easily, and probably with a bit of difficulty we'll also solve the other direction. But the advantage of this is that it provides 1,700 square metres of open space immediately. It doesn't cost much, and it helps enliven the activity of the Eat Street, which we used to love. And it should help, in my view, the progress or the lack of businesses going out of business and moving around. What we really need is a nice area where people want to be and can walk. The next one, of course, is Ernest Place, which is a lovely place right in the middle of Crow's Nest, and it has two surfaces, one grass and the other one grass that's worn out. On that worn out grass, I think we could possibly look at putting a children's car place, where, because a lot of parents sit there and enjoy their coffee, and they could supervise them quite easily. And then we go to Hume Street Park, which we've just completed recently, stage 1, a nice circular area. It's not being utilised. The surface is looking pretty poor, needs a lot of maintenance. But once again, you could probably put there, with more shade, you could put an all-abilities playing field for the children, or doing something competitive like that. And in Clark Lane, which is where the buses will travel, there's not where the bus, the Clark Lane before you get to that park. If you stand in the park and look back towards Willoughby Road, you've got an ugly street of walls behind the businesses. There must be some good artists who'd be willing to paint murals, and the businesses would be willing to give up their walls to create those walls into a nice space to look at, just to brighten up the space.
And I think with that, and I think this is the other thing is we talk a lot about the use of open space for those passive or those active applications. There's also that opportunity for cultural expression within our parks. There's some great examples of, I do a lot of social infrastructure planning, and so great examples where outdoor classrooms and that ability for learning, whether it be a formal sort of classroom type of setting, or learning as we play, like that ability to learn as we play, whether it be small children or adults, to learn more about our area. So I think that there's some amazing opportunities.
Lots of opportunities,
Yeah.
And lots of opportunities for other new space too. Like there's a car park in Haldeman Street, which is the government proposal to redevelop it, to place it underground and create about 1,600 square metres of open space. Well, that would be lovely to have. The trouble is that they didn't give us enough money.
Yeah.
We need another 20 million at least.
Yep.
So there's a job there for council to lobby the government for another grant, because that development would be great to have, but it's unaffordable at the moment.
And I think that's some of the challenges about delivering things differently, the cost, and as the Mayor mentioned, that sometimes there is some it's cost prohibitive to just add more spaces. It's also really challenging for some of those more awkward spaces. I'm going to hold you there for a second because we're going to come back to some ideas. I know, Naomi, you had some ideas as well, so I'm going to go to you and then I'll come back. What are some of ideas locally for opportunities?
It was kind of a little bit what he'd already shared, but I guess I've just noticed, I think it's on Miller Street here, they've kind of put some really large pot plants in and some just seats that aren't connected to a cafe. And then up in Neutral Bay, there was kind of this little road that turned out onto Military Road, and they've sealed that off and put park benches and tables that you can eat at, and also more plants there. And I just think it's really nice to change that space from just being a fiddly little road that you didn't really need into a space that people can kind of hang while they're waiting to go to the post office or kind of do things. I think it's just really nice to have those little opportunities and create a park bench or
exactly.
Just simple things like that.
And Kate, your what are your local opportunities? What are the things you walk past and go, this could make a good open space for us?
I haven't done that, but the thing that I haven't done that, but the thing that comes to mind is I'm a dog walker, so there's only one fenced dog park, and so that's something that I would love if there were a few more around, and I know that some people would appreciate it, but also for kids that, like with the playgrounds, if they were fenced too, some of them, because some kids who might have autism, and my friend of mine, her son has autism, he is likely to run away. So just for sort of security purposes, if we could think more about things like that, I think that would be beneficial.
And I think it's that idea that thinking about those different experiences in all those different playgrounds. And I think one of my bugbears is there's playgrounds put into areas of new development or even redone, and they're for the little kids. So as soon as they turn 4 or 5, it's kind of boring. And so, you know, being able to have those, as Martin said before, some of those playgrounds that have opportunities for multi-stage. And I think, John, you raised...
For adults.
Yeah,
like,
for adults
there's
as
some
well.
parks I've been to that I've had a ball at, you know?
Yeah, and that idea of those inclusive sort of playgrounds as well. All of you have touched on it. I'm going to go to Martin first around we have to do things differently, and you've all alluded to. And so I know in I think it was Tony on our Slido, so if anyone's got any questions, please coming through. They're popping on there of me, but we want to hear all your questions, and we may not get to all the questions tonight, but it's important that you pose the question because they're things that the consultant team working on this project will be able to work through and consider as they go through the engagement for this study. So they certainly won't be lost. But one of the things, I think it was Tony who cited an example in Bogota in Colombia, and they talk about, I think it's Sunday streets they call it. So that idea, John, you were talking about how reclaiming some of that road space and what we can do. And I suppose from your experience, Martin, where have you seen some great examples, or what are some of those ideas of how do we use those spaces differently? How do we reframe, I suppose, our grey spaces into even temporary green spaces? How can we do things better?
Yeah, listen, I think that's a great question. Play Australia has an initiative called 1,000 Streets. And the idea is on a Sunday, as an example, the streets get closed from both directions, managed by parents, so that the kids can play in the street, like we did 50 years ago, and they feel safe again. So that's a program that's already in Australia, doing those sorts of things. Some of the other aspects that I've seen even around Australia is the establishment of pocket parks. So you're looking at, say, 200 square metres, closing the roads so that you can actually have that and redirecting everything. We've got to move away from being a vehicle society to more of a walking society, and that'll give us a lot more space. If you look over in Europe, they're now looking at air rights. So what they're doing is they're saying, right, we've got motorways or train lines. How can we build on top of them and actually put in new linear parks, which may be 100 metres wide and go for 4 or 5 kilometres, i.e. where the motorway was or where the train lines are. So I think people are starting to think a bit differently. Also on trees, City Melbourne have done an initiative where you have urban forests. So you have the density of the trees which actually produce the oxygen again, we're on busy roadways, and it just makes people feel good around the trees. So all you need is 10 metres by about 30 metres, plant 100 trees, and the difference in about 2 years is absolutely phenomenal. So I think we need to think differently. And then another example is around a golf course, where you're playing the golf, but you can actually use trees and shrubs to give you a walkway, so you walk around the outside of it. When I was in the UK, I managed about 4 golf courses with one council, and we introduced this so there was a walkway around every single one.
Yeah, right.
And it really was embraced by the council, by the community, as a way of doing things. And I know you've got one up in Camaray, and the opportunity there is really great.
Yeah, the golf course is certainly a bit of a controversial kind of across, not just in North Sydney, but I think across Sydney, and grappling with, I think to a point you made earlier about single-use, bigs. And I think it's hard because golf is an important sort of recreation activity, frustrating at times, but it's certainly very important. But I think what people are grappling with is balancing such a large open space area for a smaller, a single-use type of thing. Yeah.
And I think you're right there. I think one of the things is if we're going to create more active parks to meet the phenomenal demand we have in inner cities, we've got to make sure that there are spaces in there for passive use. And I think sometimes we've only just got enough money for the active side, and we need to sort of reinforce that. And sometimes that has to come with hard decisions. And those hard decisions can be that we have to put rates up to be able to cope with that. And I know some of the people watching this may not like that idea, but the quality of life they will get from a relatively small increase over 4 or 5 years could be absolutely game-changing.
Yeah. And John, I know you when you were sort of talking through some of your opportunities, you were highlighting some of those ways that we can think about it differently. Other thoughts on other areas you might have sort of walked past? Because I get the feeling you're a bit like me, where you walk past and go, what can we do with this space?
Yeah, well, actually, the murals on the wall were not my idea. They came from the Main Street Committee in Crow's Nest.
Great.
Just looking around, and it's so obvious. There are lots of places as you walk around, laneways everywhere, ugly places, could really be improved in appearance. Would lift your spirits as you walk around.
Yeah.
Number one. The other thing, of course, is in the 2036 plan for St Leonard's Crow's Nest, there's suggestions everywhere about, in the green plan part of it, about utilising your laneways, utilising streets with vegetation and so forth, and places for people to sit. Something like they did in the laneways in Melbourne to a degree, although they're much better served there. And also, they're advocating, in fact, planning in the plan for pocket parks in St Leonard's and linear parks along the railway station. Now, all of those things would be good. They just need money.
Yeah.
Most of these things I'm talking about need money, and it's grant money from the government.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the challenges as well that we're facing across our urban areas, obviously, is the issue of climate change, of that heat. And I certainly felt it this last summer, where if you're in those areas of a lot of hard surface, a lot of concrete, you just feel that heat coming off. And I think that what we're seeing in the planning of open spaces is that understanding the value of tree canopy to combat some of that heat island impact, but also too for bringing back, as Martin, you said, that forest, that biodiversity, being able to bring back habitats, being able to hear bird noises. I think that's part of that idea of connecting with nature as well. And I think that how we do things differently, does require thinking outside the box, and certainly to all of you, but also to everyone sort of watching tonight's discussion, is really challenge you to think about. You don't necessarily have to do what I do and walk around and think about different sort of spaces. I think it's the nature of the job, but to think differently how you might be able to reframe a place, how you might be able to reuse a place. Because I think the community has a real role to play to advocate for these different types of spaces and working with council. And certainly, as the Mayor said up front, that that there is a genuine desire for a discussion about those different ideas of how we might be able to do it differently. And I think, the idea of how do we look at car parks? I know one of the questions that we have here is very much that issue you raised, Dimitri, about the use of schools. And how do we utilise those amazing assets? And North Sydney has I think it's the most amount of schools of any LGA, I think, across Australia. And so how do we utilise, and I know that council already has a great relationship with the local schools, so how do we utilise some of those spaces to do that as well? I suppose coming back a little bit to that idea, and I want to think about, Camaray Golf Course and, dare I mention it, North Sydney Oval. But there are some really amazing assets that this community has. What are your thoughts, being locals, and Martin, I'll come to you as well, but I want to get a local perspective of what do you see the opportunities for those spaces? And I challenge you, Dimitri, other sports other than pickleball. But anyone who wants to jump in there, what are those opportunities? How can we think about these spaces differently? Not excluding the golfers from Camaray, for example, but how do we think about differently?
Well, St Leonard's Park I think it's the second largest piece of open space we have in North Sydney, after Camaray Park, by a small margin. It's underutilised a lot, there's a lot of open space that could be adapted for shared use easily towards the northern end, and of course the oval is a exclusive area in some ways. That's what you'd call it, and for good reason. I think it needs to have some exclusivity, but it could also be shared.
Yeah.
In my view, it's a large flat oval and it could be used, particularly for the sorts of things we've been talking about tonight.
When you talk, John, about St Leonard's Park being underutilised, what are the opportunities for that park to be better utilised, do you think? I'm throwing you on the spot here, but, you know.
Well, I'm thinking about some of the things that Dimitri is talking about, such as sporting fields, small sporting fields, enclosures and so forth that might be useful. Maybe even a cricket bat, cricket for bowling and batting. Certainly, it's a great place for concerts and that sort of thing, and it's a great place for walking, but it's still got a lot of space available at certain times where we could adapt, I think.
Naomi, did you?
This is maybe not necessarily how to use them, but just an awareness of them. Like, I haven't heard of some of these parks I don't even know, like I've never even heard of them. And I've been living here for 10 years, right? And so I think when you move to an area, when you get your reminder that you need to update your voting details, P.S., here's some great places that you could play, just an awareness of those things, because like I'm interested in those things and I had no idea, right? And so then, that's an untapped little brain space that I think we could communicate better in.
And I think, Kate, some of those opportunities for some of those other spaces, is there anything that you think, you talked about dog on off leash, areas across. What are some of the other opportunities that some of those places like the golf course and potentially North Sydney Oval can be utilised for?
Look, I'm not actually sure if dogs could go there, that would be great, but I'm not actually sure about that one.
And Martin, I think to you, with your experience as well, like we have this balance between, I think North Sydney Oval is a great example in terms of there are some great economic benefits to the women's cricket being played there. I think I've been to the AFLW when it was up here as well, and those sort of things. But it's that, I suppose it's that equitable. How do we make open spaces more equitable across that? What's your because there is a real challenge when you want a surface that is for that elite sport, but you also at the same time want to open it up for those other 300 days a year that it's probably not used for that elite sport.
I think there's a number of ways you can go about it. If the sport is playing at the elite level, like there is no reason why, if it's got the right ground, the right soil, grown medium, it can't be opened up for an extra maybe 10 hours a week. So if at the moment it's played on, let's say 10 hours a week, there's no reason why you can't make that 20. But it's no use putting 1,000 kids on it for that extra 10 hours. So you've got to turn around and say, well, what can you use it for? How often? And if the primary focus is in the summer for cricket and rugby during the winter, let's space that out so it's got time to recover. You've got the resources in to do it. And it's built in a way that can cope with 25 hours a week.
Yep.
And that's, I think, part of the secret.
Yeah.
Other stadiums around, let's say down in around Albert Park in Melbourne, there's a couple of stadiums which are an equivalent, which use top class cricket, but they're used for the schools, they're used for programs, they're used for targeting particular audiences, like the junior women, etc. And then they can go on. So it is actually open to the community as well as the elite. The good thing about that is then the local community feel as though they're part of the club or the elite team, and so you embrace her a lot more.
Yeah, there is that feeling of when you walk onto those fields that others have played on, where there's a, the hallowed grounds kind of thing, that it does give you that sense of connection. I think is really important. Dimitri?
I'm thinking a little laterally here. These large grounds are already being used, if it's an oval, for cricket and AFL and sports that demand a large area and grass. But they also have large parking lots. And these parking lots are only utilised during competition, and they're largely empty. Now, these parking lots can be marked for netball or basketball or pickleball or all three, and be allowed and open to the community with restricted parking during these periods, so that half of it is courts on a solid surface, and all these sports can be played on asphalt, and we can play them on surfaces with a few cracks in. We get by. And that will open it to the local community. The local kids will have somewhere to bounce a basketball. When the kids are at school, the oldies will be playing pickleball. If there's a few lights in the parking lot, they don't have to be fantastic. I guarantee the kids and the pickleball players will be out there.
Yeah.
And as a latecomer to sport, we have learned to share. We don't try and take over a sport. We allow them to dominate, and then we take what space is left, because there's so much time that these courts are underutilised.
Yeah. Yeah.
It also earns an income, because every council that we play on charges us something, and we charge our members. So it takes a non-income earning asset and makes it an income earning asset. It may be modest, but it adds up over a period of time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the other thing, and I suppose the practicality, that open space, recreation, sporting facilities, yes, there's a social, there's an environmental and a cultural sort of benefit. There also is about economic benefits that goes with those, and whether they're direct benefits from the sort of hiring fees, or indirect benefits to business and things like that, with people coming and using those daily trips into North Sydney. I am seeing there's a few questions, so what we might do is we might throw some of your questions to the panellists, because I'd love to sort of get their thoughts. So one of the questions that that's come through is, and something we've been talking about, is open space is closely dependent on inclusion, participation and community. How do we link together these two driving needs and forces? John?
Just repeat that.
So open space is closely dependent on inclusion, participation and community. So how do we link sort of those needs and delivery of open spaces as well?
It's a good question, but I'm not sure I know the answer. But if you want to involve the community, which is what they're suggesting, it's only by education that we can do it, through council and through our local community precincts. And that's about all I can think of off the cuff. I mean,
Naomi?
The North Sydney Council has just started a new group that's meeting regularly about accessibility and inclusion. And so I guess I just want to encourage you that we are trying to think that through as a community. I'm just a normal citizen in the community that's part of this group. And so I guess, communicate to us about that, so that we can throw your bid in when we're having these conversations. And so you don't get what you don't ask for, so just keep saying what you need. Yeah. keep telling the council, and keep telling your local member, or keep telling whoever what you need. And my experience so far has been really positive on being able to share that, and that's being heard and acted on. So I'm really excited to be a part of this.
Yeah, great. Mark,
I guess it's a good question to take on notice.
Yeah, look, and I think that's the important thing, is these questions are not only for the panellists, but for everyone on the stream to sort of think about in their submissions. That I know the Mayor encouraged you to yourself and get 2 or 3 other people. So questions to pose to those. Dimitri, did you want to jump in?
Yes, and I won't talk about pickleball. I'll talk about a green open space. People don't know these spaces are there, but if they have a walk organised, or a doggy day, or a bring the kids along and we're going to play in the park day and we'll have clowns, they suddenly become aware of the existence of this. That's the first element. The second element, it's inclusive. Everybody can come, whatever their background, racially, religiously, whatever their background, they will be welcomed there. We are a welcoming country. We are welcoming people. I know that from our pickleball community. It is amazingly welcome. We have so many people who can barely speak English, and everybody welcomes them. And the same would occur in a park. So to be inclusive and to make people aware, events need to be organised and published. And that can come from the public, not necessarily just from council, with council facilitating it. So little groups can do it. And that's how pickleball's grown, from little groups. Great things come.
Martin, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, and I think some of this comes back to why we're doing this strategy now. Because it's about planning for the future, not only for the next 10 years, but I would suggest for the next 20 or 30. And that means we've got to make hard decisions. And some of those decisions are costly, but if the community don't give the needs now, they may not get another chance for another 10 or 20 years. So if we go back to my first answer, the first question, have a think about how much passive space do we need? And where are the spaces that we need more passive space? Where are the spaces and the sports and the activities that we can squeeze more active areas in? And we've had some great ideas from the panelists today, including pickleball. But we really need to find those little spaces to keep the kids active, happy, having fun, and then balance that with the passive side. The issue about the inclusion, and you've answered that exceptionally well, is really about the design. How do we design the facilities to be fully inclusive for people of all different cohorts and abilities? But the planning has to come first, and that's why we're encouraging everybody to have their input now.
Yeah. And I think one of the other questions on here as well is we talk about, a growing number of residents within the North Sydney LGA. Some of them, the question here is that can't or nearly too old to drive. So, I appreciate the assumptions being made. But as our participant here talks about, the LGA is only 11 square metres. Square kilometres, sorry. And I think as you walk and, there's two things. Are there cycling paths? Can we improve that around the area? And what is it like to walk around? How do we improve that walking experience to get people either on their wheels, in their wheelchair? We always talk about on their feet, but I'm also mindful that not everyone can get on their feet, so their feet or their wheels, to get out of their car and walk around and use that. From the locals here, what can we do better? John, you're a big walker.
Yes, I am. In fact, it's one of the things that keeps me healthy, and it's, according to my doctor, walking is the best exercise of all, particularly at my age. And I don't think there's any restriction on where you can walk if you're capable of walking. There's not much in North Sydney that you can't cover, apart from this 18% grade up Shirley Road, which is a bit of a challenge, but that's an exception. Oh, it's a great place to walk around because the scenery changes differently, and of course it's such a beautiful place when you see the water to be able to enjoy it. And of course lots of people around that you can chat with easily. We're a welcoming community, as Dimitri said, and an easy group to get along with. So I encourage walking. It's great.
Yeah, and on our questions here, Mary, thanks for your comment there. Mary talks about walking is affordable as well. So I think we are. One of the biggest discussions right now is cost of living and that access, and not everyone can afford the fees for sport. I know particularly for junior sport, the cost keeps going up, and walking is that really affordable kind of form of exercise, being able to meet people. I know we talked about it in last night when we were talking with the inclusion and access panel, and that ability to just sort of look for people and smile and that connection that it brings. So there's huge amounts of benefits for that as well. One of the other comments, and Mary, your comment there about would like to see more harbour swimming possibilities. The harbour is for everyone to use, not just making money from it. And I think it's a really interesting asset that the North Sydney LGA has. How can we, it might be swimming possibilities, but what are the other opportunities to really leverage that beautiful asset? Like, I know, Naomi, you talked about your favourite place is to walk across the harbour. What do you see some of those opportunities along open space there?
There's a beautiful Peace Park, which is in Cremorne. It's one of those weird suburbs that's lots of suburbs that all kind of meet together, but Peace Park down there. There's a beautiful harbour kind of bay that I just think would be perfect for swimming, but you can't really, I don't see how you can get to it. I don't know why we can't swim there. It's beautiful. It's got a great, there's bathroom, there's all the things that we already need there.
And I think
just access.
And state government have recently put out their sort of paper on opportunities to swim in the harbour. Kate, your thoughts on is there opportunities along the foreshore there? It must be a pretty nice place to walk the dog along there.
I'm not sure about swimming opportunities, but I always think of kayaking. It's so wonderful. So if we could promote that more, that would be an amazing opportunity, for the harbour.
Yeah, that opportunity for those water-based sort of recreation
Yeah.
activities as well. Martin?
If you want to start thinking really laterally, why not build a linear park 100 metres wide into the river and go all the way up? And there's nothing doing the space at the moment except water.
Yeah.
So if we want to think really laterally, and that's been done around the world, you just extend the harbour out, put everything in there and build new parks.
Yeah. Was it New York that they built a park pretty much in the harbour there, or on the Hudson River there?
Yeah, and Madrid's done something similar as well.
Yeah, so great. John?
I was just thinking about a park on a railway line, and one of the ideas that's been floating around here for some time, and it may not eventuate, but it's the High Line on the railway line around Waverton. Yep. The only problem is it's an active railway, and until such time as the Transport for New South Wales gives that up, it's a pretty well dead horse. But there are other opportunities, I think, not necessarily on railway lines, but like you say, along the harbour foreshore. And I was just thinking if you go towards the Roseville Bridge, I've been up there often in my boat, and you can walk, once you go under the bridge, you can walk quite a distance around that area, right on a foreshore, and enjoy quite a nice space there. Yeah. So something like that would be good here. We do a lot of it already. There's foreshore walk from, basically you can go from Manly
right
via
through
the
Rose
spit
Bay,
all the way
I think
back.
now.
Yeah. So that's been a state government initiative for some years, but we should embrace more of that, I think.
Yeah, beautiful opportunity here to do that as well. One of the things I'm really interested in is North Sydney has a lot of workers. So particularly in sort of where we are right now, sort of on Miller Street here in this kind of what we would class as the CBD area. So there's a lot of people coming in to work. How do we cater for some of there? Because, we know that through work there's a lot of opportunities to either do something through lunch times, whether it's after work. How can we cater to that working population? Pickleball? Do we get them involved?
We generally find that people working don't want to play pickleball during the day.
Right.
And they always want to play in the evening. So we utilise the spaces in the evening whenever we can get lights. And you can also utilise indoor spaces, big halls and things that are sitting empty at night. You can either mark the courts permanently. In modern times, there are lights that you can shine from the roof, and they will suddenly give you the markings for a basketball court or a netball court or a pickleball court. To give you an idea of size, we can fit 3 pickleball courts on 1 netball court. We can fit 4 pickleball courts on 1 tennis court. So it doesn't take a lot of space. But woodworkers come and play for an hour in the middle of the day. We've never actually tried it. No pickleball club has ever tried it. It may well fly.
Well,
So I like that idea, and I'll take it back to the clubs.
great, an idea to get more into your bigger... And I think you raise an interesting point, and Martin, I think that idea of lighting is always really hard, particularly I think in areas like North Sydney that are dense. And when we're talking about utilisation and sweating those assets, usually that means pushing sort of the bookings for as far in. What are some of the, I suppose, some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities you see in how people are lighting and expanding the utilisation time that we have?
Yeah, a lot of the councils around Metro Sydney have cut-off times, whether that be 9:30 or 10:30, to respect the local population. I think what we're seeing now is that you've got to have the technology in the sports fields to be able to do that, to be able to cope with that intensity. It's slightly easier on the courts where you have a hard surface and you can utilise that, whether that be for pickleball, 3-on-3, basketball, etc. I think that the technology in the lighting allows you now, with it being LED as opposed to metal halide, to actually have it more focused so the light spill isn't as great, which allows you to have quite a well-lit area, but only a metre or so outside that area can almost be pitch black. So I think we're starting to embrace the technology so that it reduces the impact on the local community, which allows you to sweat the assets a bit more. Historically, we've never really had lots of lights on the netball courts because they've finished around 8-9 o'clock. But I think there's now the ability to sweat that asset, any hard surface asset. I really think we need to look at differently. We need to look at it as being multi-sport. We've heard some great examples tonight about the different ways of doing that, but also encourage the schools during the daytime to use the hard assets as opposed to the natural grass, because the natural grass can then be kept for the specific training of, say, football or rugby, where they can't play on it. So I think we need to encourage council to be a little bit more, show a bit more leadership, and I say that respectfully, but turn round and say that no, you can't use the grass, you've got to use these, because most of it is for training and for fitness, and you can do that on any kind of surface. It's when you need to use it for the technical side. And if we're talking about the natural surfaces, it's really not good to use it for 40 hours a week because it falls apart. So let's look at 25 to 30, which you're already sweating the assets on natural turf for that, and then put them in other places.
Yeah, and I think it's that, like with all things, it's understanding who's going to be using the spaces. It's making sure that the facilities themselves are appropriate for those uses as well, and having different surfaces. The reality is, the practicalities is that these spaces require huge amounts of maintenance, and so how do we sort of maximise that utilisation through the use of different surfaces as well? Yeah.
And with a lot of maintenance or a lot of investment comes a cost.
Yep.
And most of the time, the cost recovery is between 5 and 20% of the capital and whole of life costs. So maybe we need to look at that a little bit more so that we can get the surfaces which are more fit for purpose. Unfortunately, that is going to cost a little bit more money.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone who's been popping their comments and their questions through. I can see from the comments that we have here that there's a lot of you who are, who recognise how fortunate North Sydney is to have these beautiful natural bushland kind of areas, but it's that challenge of how do we balance the conservation of bushland with things like we're seeing like fun runs and other things like that as well. So thank you to everyone for your comments as well. One of the things that I suppose I always like to do is, it's really interesting to hear everyone's thoughts and things, but it's also really important to kind of, I suppose, challenge everyone who's watching and what your big idea is. And I'm sort of conscious we've got about 10 minutes. So I want to ask the panel, and I threw this question to them sort of late last week about what's your one big idea? It can be, I want you to challenge people, but what's your one big idea of how council, or what should council prioritise to deliver on that open space, the recreation, the sporting needs for this community over the next 10 years? So I'm not going to volunteer, I'm not going to be terrible and volunteer someone on that, but I will ask for volunteers about what your big idea is. And I'm generous tonight, you can have 2 ideas if you've got 2 ideas. Naomi, you've got your microphone up, so...
Sure. I guess I'm always trying to challenge people to think about what if it was you or your loved one whose physical capacity changed, right? So until I was 24, I was living a normal 24-year-old's life, and then I was in a high-speed motor vehicle accident and broke everything, right? So that totally has changed my perspective on what it's like to live in this uncooperative body, right? And so I guess I'd be encouraging each of you to think, if this was going to happen to me or someone I loved, what would you want for them, right? You want it to be good, you want it to be accessible, you want to enjoy it, you want it to be affordable, all those things. So I guess I'd just be challenging you as individuals to be thinking that through, but also for the council and for politicians and for funding bodies to be thinking, how's this going to affect me too, right?
Yeah.
Make it selfish.
Yeah. Who's going to throw it? Dimitri, you've got your microphone at the ready.
Yep. I think one of the things that we have to accept now from all sports is that we have to share facilities. That's absolutely essential now because we are running out of space. A hard surface can be used for lots of sports, and it should be used for lots of sports. And then it's a question of the different sports talking to each other, coming to compromises, and making sure they're utilised all the time. We love pickleball. Young people are beginning to play it. Old people are playing it and love it. Everybody gets addicted. However, my grandchildren love basketball. And my daughter plays netball. And they are very, very adamant that they don't want to lose their facilities. Tennis players, of course, want to keep their tennis courts. They don't want us marking them for pickleball. We don't want to tread on their toes. And I know that basketballers don't have enough courts from watching my kids. So I would love to have more basketball courts around that are also marked for pickleball. And I would like them to have reversible hoops so that the netballers can play. These are things that we should think of definitely doing now. Sports will have to share facilities. Big ovals are obviously already being shared, and as we've heard, they can't be overused. But solid surfaces can be, and indoor spaces can play all of these sports as well.
Yeah, great. And I think just from the comments there, I'm gonna call out, I think Tom, who's popped there. Tom, pop your comment on there. I think you might have someone who's a little bit interested in pickleball giving a go, so you might get a few more people giving you a call about pickleball tonight. John, I'll come to you. What's your big idea or a couple of big ideas that you think council need to prioritise to how we deliver?
When you asked me for a big idea, I thought of one that's a visionary project that's not my idea. It's actually already adopted by North Sydney Council. And it was adopted in, I think, about 2015, maybe earlier. And it's the Stage 3 of Hume Park. And it involves the undergrounding of the car park and also undergrounding the basketball courts and building a park over the top. And the only problem with it is a lot of money, but it's a big idea, and it's very visionary.
Yeah.
but it would be wonderful to have,
Yeah, great.
because the surface that's left would be flat and available for some of the things we're talking about, like pickleball and small court activity, and lots of greenery around at the same time.
Yeah, great.
So that's my big idea.
Great, I love it. And I think there's also those opportunities, and we talk about the big ideas. I think it's something we always talk about. What's your big idea? But sometimes it can be the smallest sort of gestures that have the biggest sort of impact and idea. And Dimitri, you talked a little bit there about even sort of thinking about the half basketball courts or the futsal that allows for some of those training opportunities and for different sort of sports to evolve as we do. Kate, what's your big idea?
I think I might have already used it. I like the idea of the fenced dog parks. So, and also for kids sort of with playgrounds to help various ages of kids, and having some sort of ability to sort of stop them running away. Basically, that's the. Yeah, sorry, I already used that one.
And give parents and carers the sort of ability to relax, so they're not having to run after their small humans when they've decided to take the bolt from the slippery dip as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's really important, because it's not all about the kids. It's got to be about pleasurable experience for the parents as well, to be able to have a bit of a rest. Martin, your big idea that you're going to throw to council.
Can I have two?
You can have two. I'm feeling very generous this evening.
That's exceptionally kind of you. I'd love to see council plant 1 million trees.
Yeah, right.
Because I think that would change the whole nature of North Sydney. The trees are planted very far apart at the moment, and I think if we plant them really quite close, it will create spaces that people would really love to walk at during the daytime, even around the CBD area. The second one is to partner with people like schools and businesses and try and create another 50,000 hours of sports space. So an example would be a typical grass field may have 1,000 hours per year usage, whereas a synthetic field could have 6,000 hours. So during the schools, they may actually be quite keen to have a synthetic field within the school. They use it for the playgrounds during the day. Then it's opened up overnight and the weekend for the local community to use. So you could pick up 5,000 extra hours by just having that one surface within the school, and have it as an environmentally friendly, so it's recyclable, it's organic infill, and it's made out of moving away from the petrochemical industry, and they're now using sugarcane to make synthetic turf.
Yeah, right, okay.
So it's got to be environmentally friendly.
Yeah, great. Some big challenges there for council and the community, because I think that's the other thing, particularly I think with the tree planting as well. There's only a limited amount of public space for street trees and other things, and so there is a genuine need for community and council to work together on increasing our tree canopy as well. I want to throw in there, because someone has just popped up, they're anonymous, but someone's popped up, and I think it's a really big idea. It's like creating linked rooftops on some of our high-rise to create a linear park in the sky across our rooftops. I think, these are the kind of things, it might sound like it's not possible, but I think you've got to put the challenge out to see if it's possible. Thinking about those rooftops, someone else in the one of our other comments in there about how we provide those spaces, those indoor recreation spaces within our buildings, and these can be rooms for billiards or other things like that. Again, it's that ability to connect with people, the ability to learn something new, I think is really important as well. I'm really conscious of time. I would like to thank all of our panellists for bringing your experience, your knowledge, your expertise, your advocacy for open spaces. Open spaces are those things that I think they are increasingly in a community where cost of living is really important. Our public spaces, our open spaces provide opportunities for non-transactional activity. They are affordable. They bring people together, as you said, Dimitri, no matter where you're from or what your ability is, as long as they're accessible, and have that ability to have some really meaningful social connections as well as the health and wellbeing. So it's a big job for council over the next 10 years. One that certainly I think with these big ideas, with the big ideas that have come through on the Slido tonight, that I think that the council and the community together are really in a great place to really tackle some of those ideas. So for you joining us from home, from your coziness of home, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate that. Please keep your comments coming through. Please keep sharing your ideas about open space. As I said, there is over the next month coming a lot of different engagement activities, whether it be on the open space and recreation study, whether it be on the other sort of studies that are out. There are discussion papers, great discussion papers that summarise all the work that's been done on open space so far, but I really encourage you to challenge those discussion papers. They are what they say on the box. They are a way to start discussion. They're the start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. So I really encourage you to get involved, to share your ideas, because as everyone on our panel have said, you've got to be able to ask for what you need. You've got to be able to challenge, because that's the only way that together we're going to solve some of these really, these big challenges, but ones that, as the Mayor said, aren't insurmountable. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.